especially to our very distinguished witnesses for taking the time, for your leadership, which has been extraordinary, but also for being here to give us the benefit of your wisdom and knowledge, particularly at this crucial time. So thank you so very, very much. Today's hearing is on the preservation of memory, combating the CCP's historical revisionism and erasure of culture, serves as a capstone or a coda on the work of this commission during the 118th Congress. I want to begin by posing a handful of questions. Why is it that so much of our commission staff time is dedicated to producing a statutorily mandated annual report that tracks, exposes, and seeks to end the human rights abuses committed by the Chinese Communist Party? Why do we report upon efforts to synthesize religious beliefs and erase the identities of distinct ethnicities, such as the Uyghurs, the Tibetans, and the Mongolians? Why do we record the names of individuals who have been disappeared into the penal archipelago, the Laogai system, or are detained in concentration camps in Xinjiang in our political prisoner database, which is really a database that's second to none in the world? It is believed that we are engaged in a grant project that seeks not only to protect the innocent from the cruelty of the Chinese Communist Party, and you here testifying know more than anyone else how cruel Xi Jinping and his henchmen have been, but it's also to preserve the memory of the Chinese people writ large, undistorted by the propaganda narratives of the CCP, the memory of ethnic groups whose unique cultural, linguistic, and religious identities are under threat of erasure, and above all, the memory of individuals who the party would blot out into oblivion. This last point is very important because behind all the statistics we collect and catalog lie individuals, each born to a mom and dad, each a precious human life bearing an inherent God-given dignity. Above all, our CECC preservation project gives testament to the notion that truth does exist, that it is objective and not subjective, and that while it cannot be extinguished, we must still do our part to preserve it. Today, there are custodians of memory within China who were forced to leave China, who seek to preserve truth, and who often suffered for it and suffered immensely. Independent historians who researched and recorded what the Communist Party considered taboo subjects, such as Yang Geshe, who wrote The Tombstone, the definitive catalog of the Great Famine of 1958 to 1962. Yang was a journalist with the news agency, though instead of being content with writing canned news reports to advance the party's propaganda narratives, used his separate time to assess archives and to conduct independent research with regards to the famine caused by misguided Mao Zedong's policies, killing an estimated 36 million people, and some have put that estimate at so much higher. Yang's great work, remains banned in China, while he himself has been banned from leaving China to receive the accolades which he deserves. Or our witness today, Rowena, who, quote, taught the taboo because she wrote and lectured on subjects such as the Tiananmen Square massacre. She was driven out of her job at the Chinese University of Hong Kong, presumably at the behest of Beijing. Now the people that Yang Jingjing and Rowena who write about, who perished in the Great Famine or were mowed down at Tiananmen Square, are blood martyrs, which one may call red martyrs. But there is another kind of martyr, that is what traditionally is called the white martyr. These are those who are stripped of position and prestige, who suffer because they are unbowed in their commitment to the truth, regardless of the consequences. They are willing to take whatever it takes to advance the truth. Such is the lot of the independent historian who shuns ideological narratives and lies. A few weeks ago, Pope Francis came out with a letter which focused on the study of church history, who also has insights into the study of history more generally. Why I'm not prone to quote Pope Francis, I prefer Benedict or the sainted St. Paul, John Paul II. His statement on the present state of historical inquiry has true relevance to why we are here today. He said, urgent need for a greater sense of history at this moment, when we see a tendency to dismiss the memory of the past or to invent one suited to the requirements of dominant ideologies. Faced with cancellation of past history or with clearly biased historical narratives, the work of historians, together with knowledge and dissemination of their work, can act as a curb on misrepresentations, partisan efforts at revisionism, and their use to justify wars, persecutions, the utilization of weapons with any number of other evils, close quote. I think that is a fitting reminder of the proper role of the historian, to give testimony to truth and memory while rejecting the errats manipulation of ideology that masquerades as history. With that, I want to turn to my colleagues, and he will be joining us shortly. Co-chair Jeff Merkley, he is on his way, but obviously the Senate schedule is packed, so he will be here shortly. But we are delighted to welcome Undersecretary Uzra Zaya, who's here today to give some comments and insights, and we welcome her with great affection.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, for your powerful opening remarks, and good morning, everyone. I'm grateful to join this important discussion of the PRC's efforts to control and distort historical narratives and repress marginalized religious and ethnic communities. As we gather this morning, the PRC continues its genocide and crimes against humanity in Xinjiang, the erosion of fundamental freedoms in Hong Kong, suppression of Tibetans' unique cultural, religious, and linguistic identity, and other persistent human rights abuses throughout the country. As Secretary Blinken has noted, under President Xi, the Chinese Communist Party has become more repressive at home and more aggressive abroad. In this troubling context, the United States government has been steadfast in raising human rights concerns at the highest levels with the PRC. Our administration prioritizes shining a light on and takes action against the PRC's abuses. Let me elaborate on some of the key ways we've done so. First, we've led the way in multilateral fora, including the PRC's fourth Universal Periodic Review, or UPR, in January at the Human Rights Council. We submitted 15 advanced questions, more than any other country, to the PRC, covering a number of core human rights concerns. The January 23rd U.S. statement at the UPR contained a series of specific recommendations, specifically calling on the PRC to cease discrimination against individuals' culture, language, religion, or belief, and end forcible assimilation policies. We again raised these concerns in July at the UPR's formal adoption. We've also worked in common cause with allies and partners since 2021, leading joint statements with dozens of governments on the human rights situation in Xinjiang at the Human Rights Council and UN General Assembly, commending the efforts of human rights defenders and the courage shown by survivors of forced labor and detention camps. Just this past October, we joined 14 other countries in an Australian-led statement condemning the human rights situation in Xinjiang and Tibet at the United Nations General Assembly Third Committee. In August, the State Department released a statement to mark the second anniversary of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights assessment on the human rights situation in Xinjiang. We expressed our grave concern with the PRC's ongoing repression of Muslim Uyghurs and members of other ethnic and religious minority groups in Xinjiang, and urged the PRC to take immediate action to end these ongoing atrocities. Second, we are robustly implementing the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act, including via additions to the UFLPA entity list. Last month, the multi-agency Forced Labor Enforcement Task Force added 29 companies to the entity list, bringing the total to more than 100. We are unwavering in our work to prevent the importation of goods made with forced labor into the United States and to ending forced labor of Uyghurs and other ethnic and religious minorities both inside and outside Xinjiang. In December 2023, we released a report under the Uyghur Human Rights Policy Act to promote accountability, which identified 2 PRC government officials connected to ongoing serious human rights abuses in Xinjiang, whom Treasury concurrently sanctioned. Third, we continue to voice deep concerns on democratic erosion in Hong Kong as the PRC attempts to silence those peacefully expressing their political views. In September, we worked with 22 partners in the Media Freedom Coalition to release a joint statement condemning the conviction of the former chief editors of Stand News for Sedition, which is a direct attack against media freedom. In November, we strongly condemned the sentences of 45 defendants in Hong Kong's national security NSL trial, national security law trial of pro-democracy advocates. Throughout the year, we took steps to impose new visa restrictions on multiple Hong Kong officials responsible for implementation of the NSL. And meanwhile, in my dual hat role as the U.S. Special Coordinator for Tibetan Issues, I see all too clearly that the CCP aims to subsume Tibet's rich traditions into its one-party framework. This manifests itself through forced relocation, the requirement of monks and nuns to pledge loyalty to the state, co-optation of the traditional succession processes of Tibetan Buddhist lamas, including His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and restriction on religious practices central to Tibetan culture and identity. We've taken multiple actions in response, including, for the first time, designating 2 PRC officials under global Magnitsky sanctions in connection with serious human rights abuses in Tibet, imposing visa restrictions against PRC officials involved in the forced assimilation of over 1 million Tibetan children in government-run boarding schools, and most recently in July, imposing visa restrictions on PRC officials for their involvement in repression of individuals in marginalized religious and ethnic communities. In conclusion, we will continue to promote accountability in defense of these and other human rights in China. Beyond the work that we do, I want to recognize our witnesses today and their civil society compatriots, both in the PRC and in diaspora communities around the world, who are fighting every day to protect these integral parts of identity. I thank these brave individuals and will continue to do everything I can to make sure your voices are heard and heeded despite the PRC's efforts to silence them. Thank you.
Mr. Secretary, thank you very much for that very eloquent statement and for your great work that you have been doing for so long. Appreciate it so much. We all do. I'd like to now recognize the ranking member, James McGovern from Massachusetts.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Undersecretary Zao, for your remarks and for all that you have done. I join with Chairman Smith in welcoming everybody to today's China Commission hearing on preserving the memory of ethnic peoples facing systemic discrimination and erasure in the People's Republic of China. I'm glad that this commission is taking up the role of preservation of memory as a human rights issue. Memory, both individual and collective, is essential to identity and to the realization of the right to culture for all peoples. The stories that we tell, the songs we sing, our writing, our music, all of these are expressions of ourselves. They are also ways that we record our shared history and pass on our knowledge and understanding of the world to those who follow us. Without memory and the narratives it informs, it is much harder to locate ourselves in this world. The essential role that memory plays in our lives is the reason that international humanitarian law prohibits attacks against buildings dedicated to religion, education, art, science, or charitable purposes, and historic monuments. It is the reason that Article 7 of the Rome Statute defines crime against humanity to include the persecution of an identifiable group or collectivity on cultural grounds. It is the reason that preserving memory is at the heart of transitional justice processes. Without memory, the rights of victims to truth, justice, reparation, and the guarantee of non-reoccurrence cannot be realized. The existential importance of memory is the reason it is so contested, as we will hear today. Any government or state that seeks to repress the language of minority ethnic peoples or rename their symbolic places or prohibit their traditional practices or forcibly assimilate them is violating their basic human rights. The People's Republic of China is not the only state engaged in these practices. In the Tom Lantos Human Rights Commission, which I co-chair with Chairman Smith, we recently examined cultural erasure in Ukraine at the hands of the Russian Federation. But the PRC's Sinicization policies are explicitly designed to erode the history and identities of several minority ethnic communities in favor of Han Chinese culture and core socialist values. As one of our witnesses will say today, Chinese officials promote patriotic education in an attempt to encourage all ethnic groups to accept the great mother country, Chinese nationality, Chinese culture, and the Chinese Communist Party. Tibetans, Uyghurs, ethnic Mongolians, all are at risk. Congress has taken some steps to counter this erasure. With strong bipartisan support, it has authorized and funded programs for Tibetan and Uyghur cultural and linguistic preservation. The recently introduced Southern Mongolian Human Rights Policy Act would extend similar programming to Southern Mongolians. The Smithsonian Institution, also with congressional support, is doing groundbreaking work to promote cultural diversity and preserve endangered languages. The Library of Congress, which has an excellent collection of Tibetan language works, has just received a donation of the 223-volume Monlam Grand Tibetan Dictionary, an impressive initiative that we will hear more about in testimony today. The Resolve Tibet Act, which became law last summer, takes a complementary approach. It empowers the State Department to counter disinformation about Tibetan history and institutions put forth by the People's Republic of China and the Chinese Communist Party, including disinformation about the Dalai Lama. Ensuring that the U.S. government is insisting on the truth about the history of ethnic peoples inside of China is critically important. The question for us today is what more can we do to build on these existing initiatives, especially working hand in hand with the diaspora communities. And so I look forward to the witnesses' recommendations, and I thank you for all being here. And I yield back.
Thank you very much. I'd like to now yield to Commissioner Zinke.
I appreciate all the witnesses being here, and I appreciate your commitment, and it does not go unheard. I think we can all agree that China is trying to erase your glorious history and suppress your values which you hold dear, and that's a concern to us all. My first question, Temulun Togochog, is that correct?
It's Temulun Togochog.
Oh, I'm sorry. You know what? I'm just going to make my opening statement.
Oh, yeah.
Then I'll go
Of course.
through.
Go ahead.
But I'll make it brief because I'm interested to hear from you. You've probably heard from us a lot, but I'm interested to hear from from our perspective of what we can do specifically. So I'll yield back to the chair, and I'll ask questions when the time is appropriate.
Commissioner Civitas.
Thank you, Chair Smith and Chair Merkley, for holding this important hearing today, and to our esteemed witnesses for taking the time to be here to share your stories and experiences with us. And I know that all of our witnesses are doing important and oftentimes life-threatening preserving work to preserve language and culture and speaking out against the CCP's oppression. And you have done so at great personal cost and sacrificed a great deal, and we are deeply grateful for the opportunity to hear from you. This past year, our commission has held hearings on preserving the memory of Tiananmen Square despite intense censorship efforts by the CCP. We've also held a hearing on the abhorrent mistreatment of ethnic minorities and the CCP's attempts to sanitize these actions within the halls of the United Nations. And finally, we held a hearing on the transnational repression by the PRC against those who dare to speak out both within and beyond China's borders. This hearing, our last of 2024, ties together the previous work of this commission and sheds light on the common theme of erasure and the lengths to which the CCP will go to silence anyone who challenges their dominance. Maintaining one's language, culture, and traditions is a crucial part of what it means to be human. These are not things that anyone should be forced to hide or change or ignore. Rather, they should be celebrated and protected. And I commend our witnesses for doing this critical work, even under the oppressive thumb of the CCP. So with that, I look forward to hearing from all of you about your experiences, the challenge you have faced, and potential solutions you have to offer the Commission. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. I'd like to now welcome and recognize our very distinguished panel. I have longer introductions, which I'll put into the record, but just briefly, Rowena Hu is a China specialist and historian of modern China, and currently a research fellow at the University of Texas at Austin. Her research focuses on the nexus of history, memory, and power, and their implications for the relationship between intellectual freedom and public opinion, human rights and democratization, and youth values and nationalism. Born and raised in China, she received her PhD from the University of Toronto. It was her participation in the 1989 student movement which set in motion her life's work. Her first book, Tiananmen Exiles, Voices of the Struggle for Democracy in China, was named top 5 books in 2014 by the Asia Society's China File, and she was designated among the top 100 Chinese public intellectuals of 2016. Dr. Hu, op-eds have appeared everywhere, including the Washington Post, the Guardian, the Globe, Wall Street Journal, among many other publications. She is, perhaps most significantly, this is her 3rd time, for our point of view, testifying before this commission. Above all, she is a passion about teaching. She received the Harvard University Certificate of Teaching Excellence for 3 consecutive years. She's been featured both on campus outlets and again, New York Times. Everyone has covered her and done so extensively. It is perhaps that passion for teaching and impact that she has on her students' lives, which led to one of the most fateful episodes of her personal career. Dr. Yu has joined the Chinese University of Hong Kong in 2019. She joined it back then, and received the Faculty of Arts Outstanding Teaching Award in 2020 and 2021. 2023, however, she was denied a work visa to return to her position as an associate professor of history because of her commitment to a truthful telling of history and a refusal to conform to politicized narratives. In sum, she lives what she speaks, so welcome back, Rowena. We'll then hear from Julian Q, who's a faculty director of international programs, and Maurice A. Deane Distinguished Professor of Constitutional Law at Hofstra University. His research has focused on the interplay between international law, foreign law, and domestic U.S. law. His writings cover a wide range of topics, including international dispute resolution, international criminal law, and China's relationship with international law. He's co-author with John Yo of Taming Globalization, International Law, the U.S. Constitution, and the New World Order, Oxford University Press of 2012. He also has published more than 40 law review articles, books, chapters, and symposia, contributions, and essays. He co-founded the international law blog, Opinio Juris, and a contributing editor of Lawfare, to a leading blog analyzing national security issues, and one very germane to his testimony today. His essays and op-eds have been published in major news publications, again, like the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, LA Times. He has served as an interim dean of the Maurice A. Deane Law School at Hofstra, as well as vice dean for academic affairs. Professor Koo has been a visiting professor at Columbia University School of Law, as well as the College of William and Mary and the Marshall Wyeth School of Law in Williamsburg, Virginia. A Fulbright Distinguished Lecturer in Law at East China University of Political Science and Law in Shanghai, China, and a Taiwan Fellow at National Taiwan University in Taipei, Taiwan. He is a member of the New York Bar and a graduate of Yale College and Yale Law School. Welcome, Dr. Koo. We then will hear from Rishat Abbas, who is a senior clinical research leader and scientist with 30 years of experience in the United States. He has contributed to clinical research and approval of several innovative new medicines in oncology and other therapeutic areas. He has a proven track record in medical research, having authored over 150 peer-reviewed scientific publications and received several prestigious awards for his achievements. He received his PhD from the Ohio State University in 1994. Beyond his scientific career, Dr. Abbas is a prominent advocate for human rights and democratic freedoms for the Uyghur people suffering from human rights abuses, cultural destruction, and repression under the Chinese Communist Party's regime. In 1998, he played a crucial role in advocating for the establishment of the Uyghur program at Radio Free Asia. Dr. Abbas played a pivotal role as well in establishing the Global Uyghur Academy Network, which has 7 branches and 4 institutes in the diaspora. He also serves as senior advisor for the World Uyghur Congress and Campaign for Uyghurs. He and his sister, Dr. Rushan, Ms. Rushan Abbas, their advocacy has come at a profound personal cost, with their sister, Gulshan Abbas, unjustly imprisoned since 2018, a glaring example of the regime's attempts to silence dissent. Our hearts go out to both of you, and our prayers and our hearts go out for your sister, as your fight for truth has entailed such significant personal sacrifice. Well, then we'll be hearing from Dr. Lobsang Monlam, who is an ordained Tibetan monk, traditional Tibetan painter and contemporary artist, Buddhist scholar, and founder of the Monlam Tibetan IT Research Center. Ordained at Suramay Monastic University, Dr. Monlam pursued rigorous traditional Buddhist studies, including advanced meditation training for more than 18 years, before recognizing the urgent need to preserve the Tibetan language in the digital area. In 2003, he began developing Tibetan fonts and digital tools, including the widely used Monlam Dictionary and the Monlam Tibetan Keyboard, which has become essential resources for Tibetan language users worldwide. In 2012, he established the Monlam Tibetan IT Research Center to promote Tibetan language and culture through technology, building 37 open source software and applications to date, and amassing a vast library of digitized text. In 2023, he launched the Monlam AI, a pioneering initiative using artificial intelligence to enhance Tibetan language learning, cultural preservation, and linguistic research with his latest innovation. Dr. Monlam's relentless efforts reflects the broader commitment to the Tibetan diaspora to preserve its linguistic and cultural legacy, as well as empowering a new generation to access and safeguard their cultural heritage, as seen in projects like the Monlam Grand Tibetan Dictionary and the forthcoming Tibetan Library. Thank you for that enormous contribution and for being here today. We will then hear from Temulun Togochog, who was born in southern Mongolian exile family and raised in New York City. In June 2024, Temulun graduated from the LaGuardia High School of Music and Art and Performing Arts with a 4.0 GPA. Congratulations to that. And currently is attending the honors program at the Mercer County Community College in New Jersey, my home state, and it used to be like a half a mile away from our home for many, many years, where she is majoring in sociology. At a very tender age, Temulun has been actively promoting the human rights of the Mongolian people in southern Mongolia, also known as Inner Mongolia. This includes twice testifying before the UN Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues in New York City, on China's gross human rights violations in southern Mongolia, and the erasure of culture, language, and identity of the Mongolian people in southern Mongolia, as well as speaking at the briefing of the UN member states at the UN General Assembly on the deteriorating human rights conditions in southern Mongolia. She spoke at the Conference for Empowering the Youth for Democracy, Peace and Justice, hosted by the Asia Freedom Institute in August of 2023, and she was invited to speak on the genocide of the Mongolian Steppe, Inner Mongolian Indigenous Peoples of China, hosted by the United States Institute of Peace. In December 2023, she was interviewed by Mr. Roland Walters, a British documentary filmmaker, for his upcoming new documentary entitled The Mongol Khan, regarding their personal experience as a youth activist born to an exile family in the United States. Just tremendous work. I'd like to now thank you and turn to Dr. Hu.
Good morning, Congressmen and Commissioners, and I'm humbled to be here today. I also want to say hi to our friends in this room. In particular, I know that many of my students have been testing me in Hong Kong. They are watching. I know that I'm banned from Hong Kong. I cannot return to the classroom to talk to you anymore. But I'm so happy that in this space, I cannot see your faces, students, but I know that you're all there with me this morning. It's very difficult to not to be emotional to be in this room again, because I remember 10 years ago when I first invited to testify at the Congress. I was extremely hesitant because I was so concerned about my family members, and I was so worried. I lived with fear ever since the day I started teaching and researching the topic of Tiananmen, the taboo that they call it. But also, I think my generation, we grew up, I was born during the Mao period, and we grew up during the Deng opening up and reform era. And we were told that, China would be very different and we are going to live with hope. I was born actually before Nixon's visit to China, by the way. And of course, I was a young kid at that time. I couldn't remember much. After the day after the Tiananmen massacre, I think that's the turning point for so many of us, as Mr. Smith mentioned earlier. The day after the massacre, I went back to my campus wearing the black arm of warning the Chinese way of mourning. And my teacher came over to me and said that if you do not take that off, no one can protect you from now on. I reluctantly removed the black armband. And at that moment, I think of the time when Mao died. My parents were celebrating the night before. They closed the doors and the windows in their little apartment. And they seemed so happy. They were drinking wine. The next morning, they took me to the public memorial, and everyone was crying. And as a little girl at that time, I was very confused by the contrasting expressions of the adults. The night before, they looked so happy. And the next morning in public, they were so sad. In 1989 again, I had to remove the black armband as my teacher requested me. For 2 generations, we were not allowed to express the basic human feelings of sorrow and joy. And for the days after the massacre, we light candles secretly in our small private space, but we were not able to continue to express how we felt. And very soon, I had to keep my mouth shut. At the age of 17, I had 2 options: to lie or to survive. I chose to lie, otherwise I wouldn't have been speaking to you here today. 10 years ago, when I was given the opportunity to speak here before the congressional hearing, my dear grandmother was still alive. And I was so worried that after that hearing, I would never have a chance to see her again with my book just published and came out. She was my mother during the Cultural Revolution when my parents were sent away. And actually, it was very true that after the hearing, I was not able to return to see my grandmother. She died without me touching her one more time, as she had been telling my parents that she'd been longing all those years. The reason for me and my generation and so many of those multiple generations in China, they are invisible people. Sometimes people call them underground historians. I do not like the term underground. We are the historians. We are the people of the voice and the memories that have been silenced. And as Congressman Smith mentioned, Mr. Yang Jisheng, he also mentioned in the introduction of his book, The Tombstone, where that he spent over 20 years to do archive work and documented the death. 36 million people was more than the population of California, by the way. And when Yang Jisheng mentioned in the introduction of his book that 1989 was also a personal awakening for him, that was the turning point that he was determined that he had to conduct this research about the lies of the Great Famine. During the Great Famine, China had actually, the CCP, by the way, I think that the biggest distortion about history was the CCP hijacked the name China. They tried to tell the world that the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, is China, but they are not China, and they do not represent the Chinese people. They hijack China and the Chinese people. And so I hope that from now on, when we refer to the CCP, we won't say China. It's the Chinese Communist Party, not China. And at that time, that when the CCP was still exporting foods, 36 million people were starving to death, and they had been hiding this in the name of 3 years natural disaster, but it's a man-made disaster when people were starving to death. So Mr. Yang Jisheng, he documented all these cases. And I actually, I'm so grateful that Congressman Smith brought this up, because I think the book Tombstone is not just about Mr. Yang Jisheng's efforts. The translator, the co-translator, Professor Guo Jian, he himself told me, I remember at that time after reading the book, he said that I have to translate this no matter what. And he kept his mouth shut and he was quiet. And he said that because my parents are still alive in Beijing, I don't want to lose the chance. And now his parents are both dead. And he translated the book with Stacy. They co-translated the book so that the book can be read by the word. And Mr. Yang Jisheng mentioned also in the introduction, the reason that he named the book Tombstone was because he wanted to set up a tombstone for his dad, who died during the famine. And he wanted to have a tombstone for the 36 million people who died from the famine. And he also thinks that after publishing this book, this would be the end of his career and many of the perpetuities for him and his family. So that's also a tombstone for himself. So he mentioned all these tombstones, and he said that lots of people were trying to erect tombstones for their family members after they became successful in their political career. And he said, even though I'm not successful as those people, but I also want to erect a tombstone for my dad, because, and this tombstone would not be a real tombstone. He said, I'm going to carve a tombstone with the facts, and that the facts cannot die in people's heart. I want to keep this bookstone that we can carry forever in the library, in history. And he did it. And I think that was the determination not only for Mr. Yang Jisheng, but the determination of so many of the people that were forced to silence after 1989, and in the face of state amnesia. So I would like to give you a quick a brief summary about what the CCP did immediately after the crackdown, after the purge, after the arrest. They started this nationalism. It's a very elaborate patriotic education campaign, and they revised the history textbooks and they revised the political textbooks, intensifying about China's victimhood under the hands of the West and Japan. And then they created a narrative, not the truth, but they created a narrative that the military crackdown was necessary in order for stability and China's rise. And in a quick words, they basically were saying that we did this for you, we kill for you, we kill these people so that China can have a rising China, can have stability. And I think that whole rising China concept that they try to create through these revised textbooks, through the museums and all the narratives. So they were talking about, number one, a China that had suffered in the hands of the West and Japan, has been a victim. And now the West is using universal values to weaken and divide China. Number two, they were trying to give the world this impression, and domestically, internationally, even though the CCP has a lot of drawbacks, But CCP is the only power, the only authoritarian regime that can keep China so-called united and protect its sovereignty, and to keep Tibet and Xinjiang and all these minorities groups together under China. And number three, they've created this narrative to show that only the CCP now can bring the interests of financial and military strength to China, so that for the first time the Chinese people can raise their hands after the Opium War. And number four, the CCP has been extremely successful to selectively choose its glory, its trauma, and what they would underlie what they are successful, what they have been successful, and also they cover up all the lies, such as the Great Famine, the anti-rightist campaign, and the Yan'an Rectification campaign. So all the atrocities and the land reform that they were responsible for China. And at the same time, in the past 35 years, we witnessed this war of memory against forgetting. We witnessed this unequal context between the state-imposed manipulation of historical narratives and from the bottom up, the people's resistance. So here, historical memory, the subject matter of history, is not just about teaching a subject that our students learn in democracy, that they can just learn in history textbooks. I think that here, the commemoration and the resistance, the preservations of history and memory has become the power of the powerless, has become our way to remember and commemorate. It saddens me to think about 10 years ago when I testified in this building. I still have on my back the Hong Kong people lighting candles every year to commemorate. But now in Hong Kong, the candle lights are gone. Victoria Park is now swallowed in darkness. And the recent trial of the 47 group, the best of Hong Kong people, is the trial of humanity. It's the trial of civil society. It's the trial of our hope for the future generation. So again and again and again, I think one of the reasons that we took to the streets in 1989 was not because of anger, not because of frustration, but because of our hope and even our trust in the CCP that they would reform itself. I think in many sense, the people in Hong Kong, my dear students, my colleagues, my friends, many of them now are behind bars and in jail and in exile. I think many of them, even though they do not trust the CCP in many sense, but they were still hoping, believing that they would be able to make a difference when they took to the streets, when they started this prior that now the CCP called them trying to, a conspiracy to overthrow the regime and all of this. So in many sense, it's a betrayal of loyalty. And we witnessed all of this. But in the past, as I mentioned, it's past 35 years, this war of memory against forgetting, for example, by Dr. Sung Yong Yi, who is in California. So he and a group of his colleagues, they have been building this mouse database to commemorate and to remember many of the historical documents. And because of this, he himself was detained in China as early as the late 1990s. So on one hand is the bottom-up state control and interpretation of history, and at the same time is this, the people's resistance against amnesia. In the past 25 years, first as a new immigrant and a graduate student, and later as faculty members, I myself at first have been attacked by Chinese students under the impact of state-led nationalism. And they call me traitors of China, and many of them even threatened to gang rape and all of those. That's why Professor Ling mentioned in the introduction of my book, other than calling Rowena a whore for Americans, these people do not have any answers to the serious questions that she raised about China. And however, after COVID, we saw a huge difference and change when the younger generation of China themselves witnessed the firsthand about how the CCP twisted the historical memory of COVID. In 2020, the CCP published a white paper about what they call the correct collective memory of COVID, and it's a growing account about the CCP's efforts to combat COVID. But at the same time, the younger generation themselves, they witnessed what it was like to experience COVID. So about a year later, we saw the white paper movement of the younger generation, when students, the younger generations, both inside and outside China, they were using white papers to cover up their face in public space to express their disagreement of the CCP's versions about what happened during COVID. So this is not as dramatic as the tank man in front of columns of tanks near Tiananmen Square. However, to me, this image of the younger generation of China, when they were holding the white paper in public space, that was another symbol of courage in fear. And it's because of this kind of courage in fear that we know that we need to tell the historical truth so that we would be able to have the continuity of we can continue the fight and to tell the truth of the people. I know I'm running out of time. I think in 1989, when they forced me to remove the black armband, I thought that's the end of it. They had guns, they had tanks, they had propaganda machines, and most important, they can erase and revise history, as Professor Fang Lizhi called that the techniques of amnesia. And they can cause all these generational breaks of historical memory. But after COVID, after the white paper movement, I saw this reconciliation of different generations finally in front of historical truth. We finally get together to understand each other. So it's not an ending after all. I think 1989 was the time that so many seeds were planted in the hearts of so many generations of the Chinese people that we believe that is the historical truth that one day would bring us truth and justice. And if we want light, we must conquer justice. So 1989 may remind us of repression, but it also reminds us the power of the people and our basic human rights for truth and justice. So I'm sure history will witness the Tiananmen spirit as the power of the powerless, and now the Hong Kong spirit as the power of the powerless again and again. I'm sure that we may lose many battles, but I know we are going to win that war of historical memory. I know that history is on our side. Thank you very much.
I do. Thank you so very much. The Undersecretary, I understand you have to leave at 11:30. Oh, good. Oh, good. Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Koo.
Congressman Smith, honorable members of this commission, thank you for the invitation to appear before you today. I want to honor the panelists who are here, who really have gone through things that really put them at risk of retribution just for speaking here today. My remarks are kind of different. They're going to focus on the way in which the Chinese party state has used tactics to take advantage of the weaknesses of their own legal system and the strengths of the U.S. court system to advance the goals that we're discussing here today, the goals of suppressing evidence and narratives about China's own history. So I just want to quickly define my term here. I define lawfare as a strategic use of legal systems and institutions to achieve military or political objectives. This concept involves leveraging legal mechanisms to damage or delegitimize an opponent, often by imposing legal and financial burdens through litigation and other actions. China's People Liberation Army has long used the term lawfare as an essential component of its three warfare strategic doctrine. The instruments of lawfare include all forms of Chinese domestic law and international law. But in recent years, what's interesting is that Chinese entities have shown lawfare can be used within the U.S. legal system as well. For instance, Chinese companies have filed lawsuits against Chinese nationals residing in the U.S., purportedly involving commercial disputes, but really motivated, it appears, by efforts to achieve Chinese government objectives, maybe against people wanted for alleged corruption at home or against political dissidents living in the United States. All of these lawsuits share similar characteristics. An entity officially unrelated to the Chinese government or the Chinese Communist Party files a lawsuit. The Chinese plaintiff is typically represented by maybe the best law firms in America that charge the highest prices. And the lawsuit almost never gets past the early stages, but does impose significant costs on the defendants. For instance, I want to talk about one example of a lawsuit that does touch on the goal of suppressing history. The litigation Stanford University versus Zhang, which is a great example of what I'm going to call asymmetric lawfare. The litigation over the ownership of the diaries of Li Rui, a former personal secretary to Mao Zedong, and his later life, a prominent critic of the Chinese Communist Party, illustrates this kind of Chinese lawfare. It's asymmetric lawfare because China uses its own legal system, which is much more politically manipulable than the U.S. legal system, to gain advantages in U.S. litigation and gain advantages in the open U.S. court system. Mr. Li, through his daughter, agreed to donate his personal diaries to the Hoover Institute for War and Peace at Stanford University. After his death in 2019, however, his widow filed a lawsuit in Beijing court claiming ownership of the diaries. She argued that the diaries contained deeply personal information and that Li actually intended for her to decide how to make those documents public. The Beijing court ruled in her favor, awarding her ownership of the diaries and ordering Stanford University to turn over the diaries to Ms. Zhang. Stanford University argues that it was never giving adequate judicial notice in Beijing of the court proceeding, and when it did hear about the case, it went to court and was denied the opportunity to make its case. Thus, despite its best efforts, Stanford was not able to contest its legal rights in China and is now under a Chinese court order to return the diaries to Ms. Zhang. To its credit, Stanford is fighting back. It filed a quiet title claim in U.S. federal court to affirm its right to the diaries, arguing that the Li donation is proper and that the Chinese court judgment should not be enforced in the United States due to the unfairness of the Chinese court proceeding. Ms. Zhang has counterclaimed, alleging copyright infringement and public disclosure of private facts, among other issues. So far, the U.S. trial court has dismissed some of Ms. Zhang's claims but allowed others to proceed, and is currently considering their trial briefs and will issue a judgment pretty much any day now, so maybe even today. But whatever the result of that case, the litigation illustrates the effectiveness of what I'm calling asymmetric lawfare by the Chinese Party state. The key to their strategy is to use its ability to gain favorable outcomes in the Chinese court system to gain favorable outcomes in the U.S. court system. Stanford was provided no official notice of the Chinese court proceeding and then denied the ability to defend itself in China, and then forced Stanford to start a legal proceeding in the United States where it will have to overcome traditional U.S. legal doctrines that give effect and deference to foreign court judgments in most cases. So, unlike Stanford in China's court system, Ms. Zhang has been given full opportunity to defend her case. She has been able to hire some of the largest law firms in the United States, which are some of the most expensive law firms in the United States, to litigate her case and defend her case. Due to relaxations on champerty rules and third-party litigation disclosure rules in the United States, Ms. Zhang, who has incurred enormous legal fees, probably hundreds of thousands of dollars, maybe even more, on a widow's Chinese state pension, does not have to disclose if any third party has helped foot her legal costs under U.S. rules. So even if she does not prevail, the litigation, which has dragged on already for nearly 4 years and has cost Stanford itself hundreds of thousands of dollars in legal fees, maybe more, is likely to deter other archives, smaller universities that are not as well resourced as Stanford University, museums, other nonprofits in the United States who might think about acquiring historical items, archives, documents, hosting them. They might think, well, maybe I don't want to acquire that one because it might subject me to litigation in China. It may be litigation here in the United States. So it serves as a deterrent for universities, museums, and other institutions in the United States that might otherwise want to participate in what many of the panelists here are going to talk about, which is the preservation of history about China that's different than the official narrative pushed by the party in China. There are no simple fixes to solve the problem of asymmetric lawfare by the Chinese government in the United States. But Congress might make some headway by enacting laws to, for instance, expedite proceedings to dismiss efforts to enforce Chinese court judgments in U.S. court. It could amend the Foreign Agent Registration Act to require disclosures of financial support from foreign government sources or foreign political sources during litigation in the U.S. court. It could bolster rules in general for disclosing third-party litigation finance, who's funding litigation if they're not the actual party in interest. These are rules that Congress does have jurisdiction to legislate over. Such actions are not a complete solution, but I believe it's the right place to start. Thank you.
Thank you so very much. I'd like to now recognize Dr. Abbas.
Thank you, Chairman Smith and Co-Chair Merkley, the member of Commission. Yeah, I pushed the button. Okay. Thank you, Chairman Smith and Co-Chair Merkley and the member of the Commission and Undersecretary Zia. I first like to thank the Commission for the opportunity to share our experience trying to preserve Uyghur memory and combat CCP's erasure of our culture and identity. This question is an existential one. As recognized by the US government and more than 10 Western parliaments, Chinese government has been committing active genocide targeting Uyghur people since 2017. In August 2022, a UNHCR report stated the PRC's actions may constitute crimes against humanity. Despite international concern over China's Uyghur genocide, the Chinese government has been aggressively implementing policies of cultural genocide to erase Uyghur memories by eliminating Uyghur language, culture, identity, and religion. If these are lost, both in the homeland and the diaspora, the CCP will achieve its goal. If these are lost, both in the homeland and the diaspora, the CCP will achieve its goal, regardless of the future political shifts. Many diaspora Uyghurs are facing transnational repression for speaking out, including my family, who have endured severe retaliation for our advocacy. My sister, Dr. Gulshan Abbas, a retired medical doctor, was sentenced to 20 years in prison on fabricated false charges as retaliation for our advocacy in the US. Despite Gulshan's chronic health issues, her unjustice detention exposes CCP's aggressive policies that target Uyghurs simply for their identity and for the activism of their relatives abroad. My sister's imprisonment is a clear action of retaliation, as she has never engaged in any form of advocacy in her life. The genocide in the Uyghur region signals a broader erosion of human rights, setting a dangerous precedent for future crimes. History warns us the consequences of inaction. Uyghur advocates worldwide emphasizes the importance of teaching the next generation their language, culture, and identity to preserve the heritage as Chinese oppression continues. Our organization, Uyghur Academy, is a global Uyghur intellectual network with 7 branches and 4 institutes. It fosters effective collaboration among Uyghur organizations, communities, universities, NGOs, and stakeholders to highlight the Uyghur genocide and counter CCP's influence. Since 2022, with support from USAID and USIP, Uyghur Academy has hosted 2 international conferences and workshops, bringing together global Uyghur community leaders and volunteer teachers. The workshop provided training Uyghur language and cultural preservation and addressing the unique need of heritage learners, those who grew up speaking Uyghur at home but use a dominant language outside. In 2023 and 2024, we hosted 2 Uyghur Youth Summer School, uniting Uyghur youth from 14 countries. These schools offered a transformative experience in Uyghur language, culture, history, fostering connection, resilience, and pride in their heritage. For many, it was clear it was their first time interacting with peers in their native language, creating lasting bond, inspiring advocacy in their communities. We thank USAID and USIP for their crucial and impactful actions. Today, summer school participants remain connected through social media, forming growing networks. This initiative shows the potential to empower Uyghur youth as leaders in preventing our memory and combating CCP's erasure of Uyghur culture. Additional investment will help preserve Uyghur language while adapting it to modern challenges. In May 2024, Uyghur Academy marked its 15th anniversary by publishing Uyghur language and literature textbook series, launched at the Capitol Hill here today. The event featured representatives from the U.S. Congress, U.S. government, and Uyghur organizations. It celebrated key achievements and showcased innovative tools to strengthen Uyghur identity and culture against the CCP oppression. If you ask, what can we do to help Uyghurs today? One key answer is to support programs that connect isolated Uyghurs in diaspora and to help preserve their language and identity. This initiative offers Uyghur hope, something incredibly rare in our situation. This is not merely about a justice for Uyghur people. It is a fight for the principle of democracy, human rights, and freedom that underpins the world we wish to leave behind for our future generations. Allowing CCP's atrocity to go unchecked threatens global value, empowering authoritarian regimes and weakening the foundation of the free world. The stakes are far greater than the Uyghur people alone. They encompass the shared future of all who believe in dignity, liberty, and justice. Thank you, Congress and the American people, for your unwavering support of the Uyghur cause.
Dr. Abbas, thank you. So very well said, and thank you for your leadership. It's extraordinary. I'd like to now recognize Dr. Monlam.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Chairman Smith, Chairman Merkley, McGovern, and Deane, and members, and special the coordinator for Tibetan the issues, as Ms. Zia. Thank you very much for inviting me to this hearing. It is an honor and great responsibility to stand before you today to address the critical situation of the Tibetan language and culture. For over 60 years, the Tibetan people have effectively preserved our rich heritage in difficult circumstances and conditions. Thank you to the leadership of His Holiness the Dalai Lama and the Central Tibetan Administration. It made it possible with the unwavering support of the Indian and the USA government and others throughout the world. As a Tibetan, I wanted to take the opportunity to express my gratitude to United States Congress and the administration for continued support to His Holiness the Dalai Lama and the Tibetan leadership. I have directly seen the positive impact of your support to our community. And before we looking into this inspiring effort, we must confront a harsh reality, looking at the facts. The CCP exercises power in two key ways, through disinformation as campaigns and through economic leverage. These tools enable it is the continued suppression of the Tibet and the CCP called ethnic minorities. We, while also posing the challenge to global security, the democracy, economic stability, and human rights. Within Tibet, our language and culture face ongoing assault. And currently, inside Tibet, the young Tibetans appear to be powerless in their ability to preserve and promote their language. The decreasing birth rate among the Tibetans in India, combined with the fact that nearly half of the Tibetan diaspora is now living in the Western countries without the adequate language and culture support mechanisms. This poses a severe threat to the preservation of Tibetan language and cultural heritage. Due to the lack of the advanced modern educational materials in Tibetan language both inside and outside Tibet, the young Tibetan face significant challenges as they are forced to rely on the second language for higher educations. This is not just about language, it is about the survival of the entire people. Despite these challenges, the Tibetan diaspora continues to preserve our heritage through the schools and cultural centers, organizations as Monlam are working to develop modern Tibetan as language tools critical for education and cultural preservation in today's global context. Monlam has dedicated itself to leveraging technologies for Tibetan cultural preservation through three major initiatives. The comprehensive 223 volumes as a Monlam Grand Tibetan Dictionary is the largest dictionary in the world. The USAID supported the Tibetan digital library projects. We have done down at 50,000 different subjects or classifications. It's very rich Tibetan as the culture or language. Then we have done more than 42 specialized software applications, include AI language models. Our latest project focus on develop a Tibetan culture-centered as a large language model, as look like ChatGPT, to revolutionize a Tibetan language, education, translation, and cultural preservation efforts. We believe that the future of our language lies in empowering the next generation. That is why we are envisioning to create modern academic subjects in two, for example, science, technology, and social studies. We want the Tibetan students to explore the world. While staying deep rooted in their identity, the current education system is struggling to keep pace with the rise of the artificial intelligence. It is too slow to focus on memorization and not enough the critical thinking or ethical developments. We need an education that is both fast and high quality, one that prepares students for the world where technology is rapidly changing everything. I envision an education that is combined the best both worlds, the timeless wisdom of Tibetan thought with the cutting edge possibility to the technology. We believe in nurturing not just external skill, but also internal development, compassion, critical thinking, and deep understanding for our interconnect the world. This isn't just a vision for Tibetans, it is a vision for America and the world. By combining the best of our tradition with the power of the technology, we can create an education system that truly prepares the future generation for the challenge and opportunity that lie ahead. We can build a future where wisdom and compassion guide our technological and advancements and create a measure just equitable world for all. In conclusion, the challenges are real, but so are our resilience. The Tibetan language is more than just words. It is a soul of the people. It is a key to understanding our history, our value, and our unique perspective on the world. And this is, we hope, emerges. The technologies, our hands, has become a powerful tool for the resistance and revitalization. Thank you so much for giving me the chance to speak here today. Thank you very much.
Thank you so very much, Dr. Monlam. I'd like to now recognize Ms. Togochog.
Senbeno, is this on? Oh, okay. Senbeno and greetings, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Temulun Togochog. I'm 17 years old and a US-born Southern Mongolian human rights activist working alongside my father, Enkibatu Togochog, director of the Southern Mongolian Human Rights Information Center. My parents live in exile here in the United States, and as a result, I have never been able to visit my homeland. I have never met my aunts, uncles, cousins, or nieces and nephews. I have never celebrated Chagansar, the traditional Mongolian New Year, with my relatives or learned many of their customs firsthand. My parents have not returned to Southern Mongolia to attend family weddings or funerals, nor to say their final goodbyes to loved ones. Despite these challenges, my parents have worked tirelessly to preserve our language, culture, and traditions. When I was younger, they sought out Mongolian babysitters to help teach me and my sister our mother tongue. This was no easy task, as there were few Mongolians in New York, but still I was fortunate enough to learn some Mongolian from the babysitters they found. As I started school, time at home and opportunities to learn Mongolian diminished, even though my parents consistently spoke Mongolian at home. Southern Mongolians used the traditional script written vertically from top to bottom, a script with over 800 years of history. This script was not easy to learn, so my parents arranged for a teacher from independent Mongolia to teach me and my sister the Cyrillic Mongolian script. In the summer of 2018, my father took us to a children's camp at the Mongol Tibetan Buddhist Center in Bloomington, Indiana. It was a rare chance to speak Mongolian, sing traditional songs, cook Mongolian food, and play with other Mongolian children, mostly from the independent country of Mongolia. It was a pleasant experience that gave me a glimpse of what it might be like to return to Southern Mongolia, my home country. However, one painful memory stands out to me. Some Northern Mongolian children ridiculed our Southern Mongolian accents and called us quote-unquote Chinese. Well, despite these struggles, I feel privileged to have grown up in the United States, a free and democratic country where I can learn my language, practice my traditions, and express my opinions without fear. This stands in stark contrast to the millions of Southern Mongolians who face repression and denial of basic rights. Over the past 7 decades, China has encouraged large-scale Chinese migration into Southern Mongolia, reducing the ethnic Mongolian population to only 18% of the region. This has not only displaced us from our land, but has also eroded our culture and way of life. In the early 2000s, China introduced policies to forcibly resettle Mongolian herders, effectively ending nomadic pastoralism under the pretext of quote-unquote grassland protection. By 2015, all nomads within China's borders had been relocated, marking the end of this centuries-old way of life. Advocates for Mongolian rights face severe consequences. Prominent activist Hada was detained in 1995 and sentenced to 15 years in prison. Despite completing his sentence, he was held for an additional 4 years and has been under house arrest since. His wife has been arrested multiple times, and his son was imprisoned at just 17 years old. The family remains under constant surveillance. Other activists have faced similar repression. In 2020, Yan Jundulam was sentenced to 3 years in prison for defending herders' rights and advocating for the Mongolian language. Dissident historian Lamja Borjigin disappeared last year after being deported from the independent country of Mongolia. Since 2020, the Chinese government has effectively removed the Mongolian language from the education system, replacing it with Chinese as the sole language of instruction. Mongolian language books and publications have been banned, and Mongolian signs and symbols are being removed from public spaces. Authorities promote quote-unquote patriotic education to enforce loyalty to the Chinese nation and Communist Party. In September of 2020, many Mongolians, particularly students, protested these policies through school boycotts and strikes. Approximately 300,000 Southern Mongolian students joined the movement. The Chinese government responded harshly, detaining and placing under house arrest an estimated 8,000 to 10,000 people. The Chinese government's systematic oppression and erasure of Mongolian language, culture, and identity is fueling a surge in violence and hatred from the Chinese population toward local Mongolians in southern Mongolia. In a recent heartbreaking case, a 9-year-old Mongolian girl, Hera, was brutally beaten by her Chinese teacher for struggling with Chinese language homework. During the assault, her ear was torn open and began bleeding profusely, requiring emergency treatment at a hospital. This shocking incident is not an isolated case, but part of a disturbing and larger pattern of abuse faced by Mongolians in southern Mongolia. Given these deteriorating conditions, I respectfully urge the committee and the U.S. Congress to consider the following recommendations. Number 1, nominate Hada for the Nobel Peace Prize in recognition of his lifelong struggle for Southern Mongolian rights and his decades of imprisonment and house arrest. Number 2, urge the U.S. Agency for Global Media to act on the Congress's recommendation to establish a Mongolian language service in Voice of America. Number 3, support the swift passage of the Southern Mongolian Human Rights Policy Act introduced by Senators Merkley and Sullivan. Number 4, assist Southern Mongolian communities, both in Southern Mongolia and in exile, in preserving their language, culture, and identity. Thank you for your time and attention.
Thank you so very much. I'm sure your dad is very proud. We certainly are. That was tremendous testimony, and thank you for the recommendations. They're fantastic. I'm going to just ask one question, then I'll come back and ask more after our distinguished panelists here are done. But I just wanted to make the point, what is the complicity, and Dr. Hu, I'll ask you this if I could, of the corporate America in denying the historical record. Back in February 15th, 2006, I chaired in my subcommittee on human rights, which I continue to chair today, the longest hearing I've ever had, 8 hours. We had Google, Microsoft, Cisco, and Yahoo. Their top vice presidents all testified. I swore them all in and asked them why they were being so complicit in denying Tiananmen Square and all the other abuses, but Tiananmen Square in particular. Google, if you went on Google in China, all you saw were pretty pictures of people smiling, nothing with tanks, nothing with bayonets, nothing with bleeding students and activists for democracy. And it was outrageous. And their answers were equally outrageous, that they were just following orders. I started my comments that day with, I had read a book called IBM and the Holocaust, and in that it was made very clear how the Gestapo relied on the Holocaust to find and track down Jews to send them to concentration camps. And ditto, fast forward to now, we had corporate America being very compliant, not just compliant, complicit in the repression. And they really never got over it. I mean, they didn't change. Google made some changes, but their technology was pretty much usurped by Chinese entities. But it was very, very troubling. And I'm wondering today, what is the role of U.S. corporations in this big, vast denial of a horrific rally that's happening on the ground each and every day by the Chinese Communist Party? The Uyghurs, the complicity we saw. We had hearings of this commission and on the Olympics, and we had corporate Coca-Cola and others testify, telling us how, they didn't want to speak out against what was happening, the genocide. They couldn't even say the word genocide out of fear of losing market share in the PRC. So if you could, very briefly, speak to that, and then I will yield to my colleagues. Secondly, the same question to you, Dr. Hu. You mentioned how, Chinese University in Hong Kong, when you were thrown out, were your fellow academics, your fellow professors supportive? We've had Inez Freedom testify here several times, an amazing man who speaks out for the repression of the Uyghurs, and he was thrown out of the NBA. He told us how so many of his colleagues, fellow basketball players, were supportive, but didn't want to get in any way named. They completely shut off contact with him because they might lose money, and the Chinese Communist Party would be upset with that. So that's a microcosm, with individual players, but corporate America, if you could speak to that.
Okay, thank you so much. I think that's such an important question. Thank you for raising it. And before anything else, Congressman Smith, I also want to thank CECC for keep doing this. I know that this is another hearing, but for those of us who are struggling in darkness, I think that it's so important that we got our voices heard. And each time, I think each of us, when we got a chance to speak to the word in a hearing like this, people on the back. I felt so much almost like the responsibilities to represent the people. I'm sure all of our witnesses felt the same, that we got a chance to speak. I remember when Liu Xiaobo was given the Nobel Peace Prize, I was teaching at Harvard, and I dropped everything. I went to Harvard Yard with another colleague of mine. We were both from China, and then we were jumping in the Harvard Yard as if we got the Nobel Peace Prize. And all my friends inside China were sending me emails saying that let's celebrate. Because I think that it's hard maybe for people in democracy, it's very difficult to understand and imagine what it was like when you're always being silenced. You didn't have a voice. It's not just you, but your whole group or your community. You were silenced all the time. And then one of you guys, when we were here standing here, I'm sure all of you felt the same, that we were giving a chance to speak out, that it really gave us a lot of encouragement and sense of solidarity. So I want to thank CECC for doing this and giving us the chance to speak out. And in parallel, this is almost like in parallel to your question about many of the people, even in the field of China studies, I often felt that when I came back after studying political exiles for 25 years, I became one of them. And how people would perceive me. Many graduate students starting to ask me this question, Rowena, how can I do the important work and not become you? I think that all these companies would face the same thing, like how can we do the right thing? I remember when Google were forced to do certain things, they decided to close down, and so many Chinese citizens went to their office and left them flowers outside to show they appreciated it. So I think that the difficulties of dealing with authoritarian regime is very difficult and challenging. And the price that we have to pay, as I mentioned earlier, you have this economic interest, you have all these things. But I said this already 10 years ago, and I think when I was speaking at the State Department, I make the point that in this global village that we lived in, when the plane got hijacked, you got a business class, I got a window seat. We'll end up in the same place. So maybe today you think that human rights has nothing to do with you. And then you have the corporate interest, you have all of this. But by the end of the day, the Uyghurs, the Tibetans, the Mongolians, everyone's, we are on the same boat in this Titanic. If it's sinking, we'll end up in the same place. And I remember at that time, people asked me to give an example. I said, if I have an example, that would be too late. So we saw the example during COVID. The violation of human rights of one medical doctor in Wuhan became the violation of human rights of every single human being on earth. So don't tell me it's just about China. Don't tell me just about Tiananmen. It's about now, it's about us. It's about all of us. So as many of the panelists just now, they eloquently mentioned, what we are talking about is not just some personal suffering. Yes, personal suffering, sadness. We talk about all of this and in our own way. But at the same time, this is beyond personal. personal. What the CCP is doing, imposing on each of our human beings, is beyond personal. It has broad implications when they change the narrative, when they change all of this, because that has a lot to do with nationalism. Like we look at Taiwan, with the increasing domestic crisis inside China, they started to play the nationalism card again. And this is about war peace, because public opinion about the regime's legitimacy is firmly based on the collective memory of the nation's past. When you expose the historical truth and historical facts to the people, domestically, internationally, I think even the Americans, sometimes they don't know all of this. They have this idea about, okay, we are not doing well, so we look for the alternatives. You saw that in the 1930s, and then you see it again now. When democracy is doing well, they look for alternatives. And then they were very hesitant to criticize the CCP. Sometimes they idealize it the other way. And I think that we need the education to expose, and then we need to convince the people that we are on the same boat in this. It's not just about China, and it's not just about some people feeling sad, the implications beyond.
Thank you. I'll ask the others later if they wanted to comment on that, but we'll come back. But the Undersecretary does have to leave, unfortunately, and I thank her for being here and being such a good leader in her own right. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to each of our witnesses for your moving presentations and for the courage that drives you to carry forward in your vital work. I would like to pose one question to Geshe Monlam and just ask you, how do you think we can further prevent the spread of disinformation that aims to sow divisions within Tibetan communities among existing spiritual, political, and regional divides? And I would note this is an important new aspect of my mission as Special Coordinator for Tibetan Issues, thanks to the bipartisan Tibet Resolve Act.
Yeah. Sorry, my English is very limited. Sorry. My English is very limited. Then at first I say in Tibet it's better. No. And this one, the week the disinformation campaign data and then the economic leverage. The Deane la Deane cannot and Zamlin di Gala Mila Wanyu Tanetan Samati Chadawa Denis several. And the reason that Ari Shungi Mone Gana Nalola and nobody tongue Mevin Choloki Tapenanzuki Digi Yongkong Nisu Yongo the Jervako. Tizola Gana Shungi force Chine Penalegating Mangudus Pena Benjurgan Chacha and Penanzugi Penatana Updogina and Tangutangu because Gana Jongi disinformation the Apple company latte and Apple company Gana ki Benjurki Novala Teni and Penangazu up to the Sangama Gana Lakayata and Tindema Nutamangolitus. Yeah, thank you.
The disinformation that the Chinese government is conducting on Tibet matters is a matter of concern for all of us. And for the United States, I believe that although we may or may not be directly able to impact what the Chinese government do inside Tibet, but their action outside of Tibet and China and in the diaspora and in the international community is something that the United States can help mitigate. For example, to give a case about our app, when we introduced it, the Chinese government used their leverage, economic leverage with Apple, etc., so that problems were posed in having our app being included by Apple in its stores. So indirectly, you can help mitigate the disinformation that the Chinese are conducting.
Co-Chair Merkley.
Thank you all very much, and thank you, Mr. Chairman, for organizing this hearing, but all of you for testifying, and all of you who have come to witness this conversation and really emphasize it. I wanted to ask you, Ms. Togochog, in your recommendations, you mentioned the Southern Mongolian Human Rights Policy Act that Senator Sullivan and I have introduced, and it calls for the preservation of the culture and language of Southern Mongolians. It directs the Smithsonian Institution to use its resources to help preserve culture, Southern Mongolian culture endangered. It directs the Institute for Museum and Library Sciences to explore a grant program to support preservation, for example, if a community sets up a museum or a language program or so forth. You mentioned your support for it, but I just wanted to, not a lot of people are familiar with this bill yet, so I wanted to emphasize, in your own words, would this be of helpful?
I think that this would be helpful because the culture in Mongolia, there's a current cultural genocide going on in Mongolia, and I think some of the main issues are surrounding things like our language, surrounding things like our traditional like calligraphy and script and things, and they're being displayed on the streets and in libraries, and currently, for example, as you mentioned, libraries, things like that, Mongolian language books are being banned, and Mongolian language is being banned as a language of instruction. So I think it's really important to celebrate the culture of Mongolians and to foster a sort of environment and where it can flourish and continue, and generations to come, such as my generation and generations after, to be continuously immersed in this, which is why I feel it's so important to keep, institutions and programs that surround and focus on preserving culture. I think that's why it's so important to encourage those and support those.
Well, thank you, and I want to add my compliments to those of the chair. A few of us could envision coming here when we were 17 and presenting such a cogent argument, so well done. I want to turn to one more question. I'm being called to a vote in the Senate, but I'm going to squeeze in one more before they come and say the last vote out. But I really wanted to turn, Mr. Abbas, to your testimony, and you mentioned how your family has suffered, and I believe it was your sister's imprisonment, and part of this is a really a horrific pressure placed on those who are diaspora working to publicize abuses, how their family is retaliated against. And so I've really been trying to amplify, and this gathering has held a number of hearings related to transnational repression, and can you give us some sense of your sister's imprisonment was directly associated with your advocacy? I just want to make sure if I understood that clearly.
Yes, sir. My other sister, Rushan Abbas, she spoke at the Hudson's Institute on 2018, December 2018, early December. After 1 week, my other sister disappeared. So that's a very clear, direct retaliation of our advocacy. Both my sister Rushan and I have been very active, especially since Chinese government is committing the genocide and crime against humanity. We have been talking with a member of Congress here at the Hill since 2017. So that is direct retaliation.
Well, advocates face great pressure, and we just want to keep acknowledging it, and in all of our dealings with China, press back against this tactic that is so completely unacceptable in our world. Congratulations on the celebration of the Uyghur Academy's 15th anniversary, and so well done. And I think the textbook series that you've worked on, is there any way to actually circulate that inside the Uyghur community in China, or is that basically impossible?
Inside China is not possible because they are eliminating the Uyghur language teaching at schools. They were textbook created by our prominent Uyghur scholars, like we have Yalkun Rose's son here. Basically, he was leading the effort, and the Chinese government has been destroying all those textbooks, and there's no language school teaching in China. So this textbook series, we, based on the spirit of those language textbooks, developed back home, and we developed here to use in diaspora. If there is any possibility, we would love to, use that in back home, basically.
Well, it's very powerful, all the work you're doing to connect the diaspora community together. So well done, and I know that's true in a number of other cultural situations. I apologize, I have more questions, but I'll submit them for the record, and I'll submit my opening remarks for the record as well, if that's okay.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. Jennifer Wexton is online. She's a commissioner, as you all know, and has been outstanding leader, particularly on the Uyghurs. I'd like to yield to her. Jennifer? Jennifer, if you have any questions or comments, we'd be more than happy to have you speak.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Oh, there she is.
As members of the committee already know, last year I was diagnosed with progressive supranuclear palsy, or PSP. I describe it as Parkinson's on steroids, and I don't recommend it. PSP makes it very difficult for me to speak, so I use an assistive app so that I can participate and you can understand me. I want to thank the chair and co-chair for allowing me to do so today. The CCP's manipulation of history and suppression of dissent not only affects those within China, but also reverberates through diaspora communities worldwide. Whether through lawfare, transnational repression, or forced assimilation policies, the CCP seeks to erase voices of resistance. The United States has a role to play in preserving these voices and holding the CCP accountable. This question is for the entire panel. Please go one after another. What role can U.S. policies play in amplifying the voices of those documenting and resisting CCP human rights abuses, particularly for Uyghurs, Tibetans, and Southern Mongolians?
Should I start? Should I start? Yeah. Thank you, Representative Wexton. That's a very good questions. Organizations like Uyghur Academy and others are at the forefront of counting the Uyghur genocide and the Chinese government's disinformation, preserving our identity and culture. With increased support, this organization can amplify the effort, ensure the preservation of the language culture, and continue the advocacy for the justice and human right. The U.S. can allow more resources to establish Uyghur language schools or language teaching programs in a charter or public schools in the Uyghur concentrated area in the U.S. Develop Uyghur language curriculum initiative to enhance youth engagement. Those are also very important. Like Virginia is a home for many Uyghurs here living in Virginia, has some initiative like Honor Care Education Center. Congress can help to ensure the continue those vital work, offering scholarship, encouraging research initiative to field in linguistic history focusing on Uyghur heritage, and provide urgent help for the Uyghur refugees in the U.S. by expediting their refugee application process. We have Uyghur has been waiting for 8, 9, 10 years after applying asylum. Facilitate to bring their family to the safety. That's also very important. We also hope that Congress can pass Uyghur Genocide Accountability and Sanction Act of 2024. The Uyghur Policy Act has passed at the House, and we hope that is passed in the Senate as well, make it into the law. We also recommend considering an Uyghur Culture Prevention Act. Thank you.
Under the Jugi Chudang region that Junichala, the Pure Nalon and Negabla, Tangas Sonjab Kalakabu Shiveres, and the nations and Tangas Chalone, Tangas de Sonjab Chasanchi Tudus, and the nations of the Arishonta and Degi, Gavab the Zogi, Animazugi, Nopshoko Lomba Susu, Penangas of Pavadazolea, and Gay region Janaki, Mixirki. Takars and Tunjur or Ramji, not the Pemas Pentoshin by Youngudus, and you what things done truly down the Red on Derrick on Yamazula, Roger Jetavina, and the pure Nalola Chemotum, Chiloning of the Chazan, and the Yamba Mabel Sonjabia Chene, and you magic tending on the Perla, the Sharius, and the thing on the Chazan Pipa, Bure Joji, the Pemasification with this.
Congresswoman, I have two recommendations for what the U.S. can do, given that the destruction of Tibetan culture inside Tibet is something that we cannot directly do anything. Those of us in exile, we have the capacity and the resources to preserve and promote Tibetan language and culture. And therefore, anything that can be done to help support this endeavor in exile where we have the resources and opportunity, that will be appreciated. Secondly, and in particular, if there can be assistance by the United States to help procure technological equipment, etc., that can enable those of us in exile to continue our work on preservation of Tibetan culture and language and way of life in this new modern technological world. That will be very useful for us in preserving Tibetan language culture and helping to do something that the Chinese government is destroying inside Tibet.
I would also like to think that it would be helpful to provide fundings for NGOs and for to create curriculums to help the Chinese population, because very often if you go to Chinatown, many people are still supporting the CCP even though they're physically in the United States. So I think this kind of resources support, funding support to NGOs and in-depth investigation for journalism in the United States, even though sometimes the CCP would say that, okay, Voice of America or Radio Free Asia, these are supported by the American government. So sometimes people try to stay away from that kind of narrative, but I think it's important that we don't actually care what the CCP are phrasing us. Like they often call me as a foreign agent for the Americans too, and poisoning the minds of the Chinese students and the Hong Kong students. But I think that we know what the truth is, and we should just do the right thing, and instead of worrying that let them manipulate our narratives and even our action in our efforts to preserve historical memory. So the monopoly of historiography by the CCP state has been is dangerous. So we should have our own, set the record straight and set up the historical memory based on the historical truth. And I think that's important in order to do this. And we have the support and funding resources outside China to support independent investigation, we support independent journalism, and support NGOs to help to get these narratives heard. Thank you.
Just something really quickly. I think just the United States needs to play defense here. Needs to be create sort of an arc of truth and history that is not possible inside of China right now. So I do think that, like I said, making sure that the archives, small universities or smaller museums are not afraid or incentivized perhaps through grant programs to preserve or to do exhibits or to do collections or preserve existing ones on all of the things we're talking about here. I think universities can be a great resource here, but I think universities in the United States do face some, there's pressure from Chinese students. They have a lot of connections in China. They don't want to offend Chinese. So I think ways in which the U.S. government can incentivize universities in the United States to research, to support professors who study these subjects and create archives and other historical collections can go a long way toward preserving and dealing with the problems we're dealing with here. Thanks.
I think that for in terms of helping Southern Mongolians, and that includes both those living in the Southern Mongolian region and those in exile, I think I would refer back to the 4 recommendations, especially a few. So the second one that I said that my father has been working on for a long time, and that is very important for us, is to have a Mongolian language program in Voice of America, because that is, as we know, a national broadcasting system, and it can really, especially within the political Chinese region that many Southern Mongolians inhabit, there is not a lot of access to free press. There's a lot of censorship, and having something like that to encourage Mongolian unity and to spread like important discussion topics and inform fellow Mongolians about the current going-ons is very important. And I think also the passing of the Southern Mongolian Human Rights Policy Act is another very important thing, and just overall giving resources and time and promoting, advocating for the preservation of our language, culture, and identity. And this just goes back to talking about our education system. That's one main thing, and our art and culture, working on preserving that, and just, yeah, sorry, I don't know what I was gonna say after that, but yeah, thank you.
Jennifer? Any other questions, Jennifer?
Mr. Chairman, this is my last commission hearing before I retire from Congress, so I want to say that it has been an honor and a privilege to serve on this panel and work with you all to defend human rights, fight against forced labor, and counter CCP repression around the world. I'd especially like to thank you, Chair Smith and Co-Chair Merkley, for your leadership on these issues, as well as your support of me as I adapted to working and participating in commission proceedings with my diagnosis. This commission has been such a breath of fresh air of bipartisanship here on the Hill for me, and I am especially proud of our work to defend Uyghur human rights. I still remember the first time I sat down with constituents to talk about the Uyghur plight at the Adams Center in my district in 2018. Since then, we passed the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act, and I've introduced multiple bipartisan bills to curb and bring attention to this genocide that I hope will live on beyond my time in Congress and soon be signed into law. It has been one of my great honors as a member of Congress to work with this community to fight back against the CCP's campaign of genocide and transnational repression against Uyghur and other religious minority populations in Western China. There is still so much work to do to protect the lives and dignity of the Uyghur people, and I trust that this body will continue and redouble its efforts next Congress to do so. Once again, it has been an honor to serve with you all. Thank you, and I yield back.
Jennifer, thank you so very much, and frankly, the honor is ours, and I know Senator Merkley and I are absolutely in agreement about this. We deeply appreciate your contribution, your leadership, particularly on the issue of assisting the oppressed Uyghur people. You have been outstanding, you've been tenacious, and you're going to be sorely missed. So I want to thank you for that leadership, and again, we will stay in touch with you going forward, because we need your wisdom and we need your thoughts, and so thank you so very, very much. I do have another question. I have several, but I will just reduce it a little bit. I asked earlier about the corporate complicity in not only human rights abuse, the enabling that it actually occurs when Xi Jinping and company take a look at corporate America and say, see no evil, hear no evil. They really couldn't care less. They just want to make more money. And I'm all for capitalism, but it ought to be based on principle. And I think ditto for our academic community. Julian Koo, I think I'm glad you were able to say Stanford has been speaking up in the case. You might want to tell us who the law firm or firms are that the Chinese Communist Party has hired to in the case. But I remember back in the early 1980s when Stephen Mosher broke the story about the horrific forced abortion policy of the Chinese Communist Party. He was seeking his Stanford doctorate. That's how he got there. He exposed it. 60 Minutes did a big piece on it. PBS did another huge piece on it, all recognizing that Mosher broke a story of depravity, where the Communist Party was killing unborn babies and ripping babies out of their mother's wombs, and women were fleeing, and we know it's used as a part of the genocide against the Uyghurs and the Tibetans. I remember when John Avedon wrote a piece, an op-ed, talked about the rape of Tibet was the name of his piece, and he talked about how just one little child after another was being killed by the Chinese Communist Party to enhance the Han displacement, because if you kill people, you don't have a population anymore. And if you kill them while they're unborn and destroy their mothers' lives in the meantime. Well, Stephen Mosher broke that story, and he was thrown out of the doctorate program at Stanford. Matter of fact, it was so bad, and I raised it repeatedly. I've been here since 1980. Repeatedly, the Wall Street Journal did a piece called Stanford Morality, and talked about how complicit and how weak they were in not backing up their doctorate candidate who just broke a human rights abuse story because they wanted to have access. We saw a very similar kind of complicity with the Confucius Institutes. I've chaired 4 or 5 hearings on that. We had NYU testify because they've got a very large campus in Shanghai, which I actually went and spoke at. But frankly, in order to have access, they looked the other way with regards to horrific abuse, and while doing that, the record which you have chronicled and are continuing to chronicle so well, then gets shunted aside. And as I mentioned before, the way Google, I actually, during my hearing, on the big screen in the Foreign Affairs Committee room, 2172, we showed the 2 Googles. If you Googled in the United States and you Googled Tiananmen Square, you got a story that was terrible, which they deny to this day. If you Googled in China using their, you got nothing but pretty pictures. And it's just what a distortion of history and reality. And I don't think they've learned their lesson, many of our corporate leaders, and they continue to flock just to make money to Beijing and to Xi Jinping. So if any of you want to speak to that, because I think that distorts the historical record, because things that never get recorded, and you're doing it to the best of your abilities, it just never gets, but on the Confucius Centers, there seems to be an awakening occurring among our colleges and universities. We invited several to testify at our hearings. Some wouldn't come. Say, what are you doing? This is soft power on the part of Beijing. And it also is a way of going after their diaspora. One other thing, we have a bill that passed the House, bipartisan, called the H-Keto bill. It deals with the 3 missions of the Chinese so-called economic side in San Francisco, New York, and Washington. It passed overwhelmingly in the House. We can't get it out of the Senate. It's being blocked by the Senate Foreign Relations Committee as we meet here today. And we know some people in the State Department don't want it, which I find, here they are. They're using that as a way of affecting, and I would say malaffecting, the diaspora here in the United States. They track them, and do all kinds of, and we saw it at APEC, at the summit, when they were organizing the anti efforts, against the human rights activists who were trying to really make a difference there. So, and one final thing, Dr. Monlam, part of that history has to be the history of torture by the Chinese Communist Party, which, Manfred Nowak, the Special Rapporteur for the UN, and others have chronicled. But we've got to keep that front and center. If you're arrested, you're likely to be tortured. If you're a political religious prisoner, you will be tortured. And it's the chair, we've had hearings on the chair, the infamous chair employed by the Chinese Communist Party. I mean, they've perfected means of extracting hurt. We had a woman, as you know, and our next Secretary of State, assuming, and I think he'll get confirmed. He and I had a hearing, but he was chair, I was co-chair then. And we heard from a woman who talked about, she was a Uyghur, and she was being tortured, and she kept saying, why are you doing this? And they said, because you're a Uyghur, because you're a Muslim. And that's why they were torturing her, putting things, indescribable tortures being done to her. We had a Buddhist monk, Paulden Gyatso, who I invited to one of our hearings years ago, and he was stopped by the police here, the security, the Capitol Police, because he brought a cattle prod to show this is what they do to us when we're in prison. So I had to go down, and we got him through the security, and I said, he's showing us what they do with this cattle prod, and this is Xi Jinping and his predecessors that have done this. So again, as the chronicling of history occurs, let's not forget, and I know you won't forget because you don't forget, just how the torture that is unspeakable, that is Nazi-like by the Chinese Communist Party. We love the Chinese people. They deserve better than the Chinese Communist Party. And again, you guys, you ladies and gentlemen, are doing an amazing job in doing that. So I think Dr. Abbas wants to say something.
Thank you so much, Congressman Smith. As you said, we have live witnesses from those, the torture, the camp survivor that testified. I think we probably have testified here at your commissions number of times. Basically, that's what the ruthless the CCP is. With regard to the U.S. company, they're continue conducting business. They're ignoring the ongoing Uyghur genocide, and they're aiding spread of misinformation. That's because the Chinese government has very powerful propaganda machines, and the disinformation, long arm has been in the U.S. using our platform, the Facebook, the X, the social media. I think it is essential to support educational campaign. For example, Uyghur, they also have a very long arm in the university, as you mentioned. Right? Uyghur Academy, since 2017, we have been organizing the conference and educating. For example, we had at Columbia University, at Harvard University, at Yale, Indiana University, George Washington University. We have been doing that. Basically, it is essential for the Congress to support and enhance the educational campaign to raise awareness about the plight of the Uyghur people, about the genocide, so those companies can hear the universities, students, the professor can know firsthand from us. Thank you so much.
Yeah, along the line, I fully agree. I think that the CCP has been using democracy to undermine democracy in democracy. So on campuses, and we saw that all the time, and students are living with fear. And for faculty members, I think people like me, the better you are with your job, the more possible that you're going to lose your job. And it's the same for journalists, because you cannot get access to the to China, and then you cannot get work visa as a journalist, as a scholar. So they are making this like it's conflict of interest. You study China, but then the Chinese government controls whether you can go into the field, whether you have opportunities, you can work with the students from China. So this is conflict of interest, but then they control all of this. Number one, using democracy to undermine democracy. Second, we are in a deep dilemma. The better you are with your job, you are going to lose your job and pay a personal price for those that's originally from mainland China. I think not until the day that we can speak without, we have human rights, we can speak without fear, we can write without fear. We don't have to worry about like me. If I teach well, then I am going to face consequences, personal, professional. Until that day happen, that I think the CCP is going to control us. So the only thing that we can do, I think, in the United States, number one, please preserve and protect your democracy. To set up a good example, in 1989, the reason we took to the street was we were inspired by the liberty and democracy of the United States. That's why we set up the statue of the goddess of democracy in Tiananmen Square when the tank come in and then crash down. So I hope that we would have a strong democracy here to show. Thank you very much.
Under the Jana Nanoke, and Nisu Chitang and Nisu China, Pesi Lochus, Jani, Mancho Dakosi, Tatoni, Gojab to go to Chitang Chan, and the reason that Tanganzug, in the Vilum Truju, Nano like Janaki, Nisu Khan Shomba, Tanguya, Nisu, that censure Nalone, nyarsache ode hajan ke chimore ta dinde songsa azu chiloni nyarsache motwe ta di pyo nang da pasha ni gemi kuran zu ge nezer de lo churan dona nezer nyarsache motwe ne dan dinde cha de sha chikti che an niwa di kuzugi nizu zuma dan reshe lokpa japche ani 총재 기tun이 칼에 고지 레실 로가점니 아니 고지기 벤조기 개발을 다니 아니 단당 저기 배우단 다 이구단 디기 단념을 줄로 딱 강에 망고지가 컴퍼니들이 총재를 되는 강에 망고 택이 되었다.
Mr. Chairman, in terms of the preservation of the history of torture, we all know that inside China, the Chinese government revised history and therefore, leave alone ancient history, even history within 10 years would be changed and people inside China would not have that opportunity. So what we can do outside, and we do with our Monlam, for example, is the fact that the Tibetans and diaspora have written about their experience, including the experience of torture, as you know about the case. And these are being preserved and disseminated. And we also are trying to have more of these online so that they can be seen and can educate the coming generation on the torture. That's the fact. Secondly, I also agree with you that corporations in order to gain access or for fear of the Chinese economic leverage tend to be go after Chinese disinformation and therefore create situations outside. And these, for example, those of us also working on Tibetan language and culture outside also face problems with these corporations because of Chinese disinformation that they tend to be believing either because of disinformation itself or because of economic leverage.
Just let me add one final thing. When President Bill Clinton invited Cho Ha-tien, who is the defense minister for China, to the White House, gave him a 19-gun salute. Here was the man who was the butcher of Beijing. He ordered operationally the killing and the maiming of many, many of the greatest democracy activists and the imprisonment of others. He went to the Army War College while here for about a week and said, nobody died at Tiananmen Square. Now, I read the People's Daily in English, and it was all over, in their media, how he's taking Washington by storm. So I put together a hearing in 2 days. We had people who lived it. We had a Time magazine correspondent who was there at the square. We had a People's Daily reporter who tried to report and went to prison for it and finally got out through a way that was just amazing and came to freedom. And they all bore witness. And we invited Cho Ha-tien to come and testify, or anybody from the Chinese embassy. And they didn't send anybody. He certainly, so we had an empty chair. But it was a reminder anew that how brazen they are, that they can lie in the biggest of way. The bigger the lie, the better. Again, Nazi-like, because they were always about the big lie. And so many gullible people just buy into it. Again, I don't know why Bill Clinton had him there. It was terrible. He delinked human rights from trade on May 26, 1994, which was a terrible misdeed on his part. That's when we, in my opinion, lost China. And I'm not being partisan. Others have been not as weak, but weak who have sat in the White House. But Cho Ha-tien, here he is. The guy should have went to The Hague for crimes against humanity, and he gets feted at the White House. So why are we in disbelief that they think that they can market lies ad nauseum, and they're bought hook, line, and sinker by a gullible media and certainly by the corporate types and many, many politicians. So that hearing was so telling to me. We had these great people, including students, testifying. Again, at great risk to themselves and their families back home. But they said the truth had to be told. The record had to be clear. I'd like to yield to Commissioner Nunn and thank him for his leadership, because it's, and for winning in a landslide.
Well, first of all, Chairman Smith, thank you very much for bringing in this group. I appreciate this being not only a bipartisan effort, a bicameral effort, but also bringing in elements of the executive administration for a comprehensive whole-of-government approach in addressing what China has perpetrated not only on its own people, but around the world. Look, we have long known that Xi Jinping and the Chinese Communist Party will never fully give us the truth about practically anything. But alternatively, Xi's regime is reaching back in time to actually shift the narrative of its own rise to power and changing history before us. We need only look at what happened on the 35th anniversary of Tiananmen Square to see how China censored its own people yet again, 3 decades on, eliminating things like Tank Man, continuing to perpetrate the big lie, as you noted, Mr. Chairman, that no one perished in Tiananmen. In 2021, China's cyberspace regulator launched a top line for reporting of any harmful information involving historical nihilism, meaning that that level of free speech couldn't even be discussed within China. On the world stage, the CCP continues to deny human rights and violations against Uyghurs, Tibetans, Mongolians, and others. The CCP subversion of historical and public discourse surrounding sensitive events shows that they not only will go to any length, but they will literally try to rewrite the history books of a country that is thousands and thousands of years old to meet a present-day desire to have a narrative in their favor. But through the works of communism and their efforts to subvert this, there are heroes, particularly those in front of us today, those serving on this commission, the people who have been brave enough in the diaspora community to stand up for what we know to be the rich history that is the Chinese people. We can counter these efforts to ensure these important facts and a future for China are not erased today. And I believe it's our duty to speak out for those who cannot speak with us presently because they are detained either by the CCP, its crippling grasp over its own population, and its aggressive and nefarious actions overseas to silence those who would call out their bad behavior. So with that, Dr. Lobsang Monlam, you are a Buddhist monk. You are a Tibetan monk. You are also a tech entrepreneur. You founded Monlam Artificial Intelligence. I, as an Air Force counterintelligence officer, worked with a prototype program called Blue Horizons. And in our prototype, we looked at large language models. The first priority we did was to develop a program called Project Maurice. And it was to translate in real time what was being said behind the firewall in Mandarin so that folks around the world, particularly the preponderance of those here in the U.S. who speak English, could truly understand what was being said by the Chinese government about the Chinese people. And you're absolutely right. What comes out of China through, the daily messaging in English was immediately seen to be counterintuitive to what they were speaking about internal, particularly about its own people. And while they refused to mention Uyghurs in their English publications, they clearly were designing a comms plan internal to China to threaten those communities. And certainly, as you have seen in Tibet, this is one of the areas where the manipulation of language, of narrative, of history, of culture has taken a frightening hold. The chairman brought in an American actor, Richard Gere, who highlighted directly what this has done to the exiled community. Doctor, with your work, I wonder if you could speak to us about the suppression of narratives in Tibet as a way to control the population there by folks in Beijing.
Yeah. No. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. The kuzuki gemi the disinformation ki nobody the kuzuki long tongra ki nyamyo ki jodene chires and de la teni pyo nano la kuzu chigni kuzuki pyoba ki mi zumashi so otupta ki yorsa gyana ki mi zumashi so ne ani di CCP ki karishe go ne denyen tungmiche and di manyamba ne di jabla no ngutani the dini ki nobala teni tana kuzuki 딱 가르쳐면 CCP 가르려면 영역이 근데 디기 준비디 미 약고매죠 썸노 약고 담아진 배낭 저기 배낭로니 미디 우투니 딱 저발라 딱 님도 매번 돈이 딱 고쳐비는 아니 배낭로 면서던 스스세게 그래서 딱 겸이도 저 저기는 양 그저기 제단 로가지 전에 아니 소소기 소와대 견도 매번은 냠도 롭주다 미 망고세지 배나 딘디레스로 딱 고즈기 단다기 겸미기 삼로 레바데 차상 고난스기 CCP 로단데다 간다 찍바 직장 주선이 아니 안주기 배바성이 민점마도 자원이 매워서야겠다 디레서 미유데 안 딘디레스 선선 땅 안주 디 출로라 선접 야고 최고 최도 단 누가 제시된 건 있는데 technology 통교스 안 디셰버나 겸미기 안주 자원이 벽이 좀 짬미스 자원 소통 말했다
The Chinese government is trying to change the narrative and to stop the real history from coming out in two ways. First is by censoring those who can really tell their stories inside Tibet and not being able to speak truth to their power. Secondly, they have a knowledge of disinformation going back to many years, and so they have that experience of the impact of disinformation for their political agenda. And what they do is they create fake Tibetans in whatever way who will voice what they want to hear and what they expect to hear out of that. And that is something that we need to understand. And those of us in exile, we try to sort of alter that situation by using modern technology, modern ways or means, to the best possible way in which we can provide the reality of the situation.
If I can follow up on that, because you've identified two things I think are really important here. One, limiting who can speak, and two, driving their own disinformation campaign. Dr. Monlam, you've also led your own resistance, as it were, to preserve Tibetan language, history, through your own artificial intelligence program. Can you tell us how you've done this, and is it being successful?
Yeah. Benang anjegi Monlam LLM dela anjegi zote kazang anjegi pyugi tep tingasigi sabichane Lobsang tab resro and digital dandagin somning on yode LLM samin on anjegi pyugi region lapa yungi yakshu chikchagatus and you what anjegi Microsoft ki the translation or Germany or the Tamil you know because samagi 인지기 단납쇼기 삼노티 실라샤베 벽에 region 때 심만도 수수기 region 엄마들 이 제도면도서 근데 선사 당 안수기 수수 region 엄마 영이 급자 마시 든리이 벽에 LLM 첨부지 서비너스 디 간나마고 수직기 떨마타베다 아니 디기 안수기 이게 녀와서만 미기 트라던 region도 딱 컨디는 녀사치 다 미럽 주만 안수베죠 다 약슈레스 베나 안수 달리라마 AI 당가지던도 소야 판득이 요소로 근데 선사 단 점링 디간라야 판도 첨벌에 안가주 벽이 가서 그러다 섬노당 따와 문트는 내고는 다 수케 쳐주려서요.
I've been mindful of this issue, and therefore in two ways we have been able to work on this AI introduction. First of all, we have a collection of 50,000 Tibetan books in LLM, which may be by far the largest resource on Tibetan, things Tibetan within throughout the world. And that is a resource that will continue to help and use and expand. Secondly, there are online translation facilities, whether it's Microsoft or anything. But the weakness of these are that they are not born out of Tibetan cultural background, and so they don't have that understanding, knowledge of what comes beyond culture when we do this translation. Whereas we at Monlam AI have that opportunity of our background in it, and that can enable us to work with these things. We are currently now working on the Dalai Lama AI, which will also help on this. These are ways in which we are able to work outside of China, where the Chinese government cannot stop us, and we are able to do this. Within Tibet, within China, they cannot do that.
Very good. Doctor, I want to applaud you, first of all, for developing this. Your career of sacrifice and service goes a long ways, not only to preserving your heritage here, but to being able to ensure that it can survive on well into the future. It's also a best practice. It's something that we should take as a playbook model to other communities who also need to be able to preserve themselves in the front of what is happening by the CCP to stamp out an entire national history. I'd like to speak to the next generation on this. You know, Ms. Togochog, you are a Mongolian diaspora who has come to the United States. You have seen your history through your family, through the practices that you're having, but even far, far away from China and Mongolia here in the United States, I wonder if you would share your experience on how you've been able to, A, learn about your history, preserve it, and then maybe share with us how the Chinese have even targeted you here far away from Beijing.
Well, it's, as I said in my testimony, it is very difficult to preserve Mongolian culture here, especially my family likes to say we are a minority within a minority. To begin with, there's not many Mongolians in New York or the East Coast alone, and let alone considering that there's even less Southern Mongolians. So it is a bit difficult, and growing up, I learned Mongolian, but over time, it's a difficult struggle, or like a difficult juxtaposition being both Southern Mongolian and American, because as I attended school, my older sister, her mother tongue was Mongolian, so she had a difficult time making friends, and therefore English had to become our primary language, and over time we lost that aspect of our identity, which is just really it's really unfortunate because it's such an important and like keystone aspect of a culture's. But besides that, we continue with our traditions, and though we might be far, far away, we still, thanks to technological advancements, we can still call our family for Chagansar, and we still celebrate that every single year. But even in the U.S., far away from China and Southern Mongolia, personally, we've had my father has had calls coming from China with threats, and there are many, like on social media, there's many people speaking out and saying, you know, what we're saying is false. When I spoke at the UN, there was Chinese representatives saying that what I was saying is false, and much like Monlam said, I believe, they created fake Southern Mongolians, or they got Southern Mongolians to quote unquote say, oh, what they're saying is wrong, and we have a Southern Mongolian to prove it, which is of course inaccurate. So even so far away, and even being born in the US myself, I've still had this struggle with trying to get CCP control to lessen that sort of control and the grasp that it has over us even in the US. But yeah, thank you.
Doctor, yeah.
Yes, thank you, Representative Nutt. Just to your point, next generations, we have our next generation from Harvard University, Uyghur student. She grew up in Texas. There's only one Uyghur family lives there. She only speaks barely Uyghurs at home, and she attended our summer school last year in Ankara, 2-week Uyghur language and cultural summer school. After the summer school, maybe if you, with your permission, do you want to hear directly with Chairman?
With the
Smith?
Chairman's permission.
Okay. Could you please share your experience?
Please introduce yourself.
Yeah, introduce yourself.
And what you're studying, where you're studying, and then share
And
your
what you're doing.
experience.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Please.
First of all, thank you so much, Rishat, for introducing me. Thank you so much for the Congressional-Executive Commission for having this hearing in the first place, and Congressman Smith for leading all of this. So my name is Kausar. I'm a current junior undergrad at Harvard studying history and social anthropology. So I'm interested in possibly being a historian, maybe going to policy law, and I also write for the Harvard Crimson as a columnist. So a lot of these things, as a result of just this immersion, just the summer after my freshman year of college, I was able to really integrate the Uyghur identity and just the Uyghur culture into the work I'm doing. I write articles on the Crimson about being Uyghur. I write and speak at the Institute of Politics anytime there's anyone that I would like to question. I also incorporate that. So just a result of that, it's made me a lot more aware. And I think that for many other Uyghur youth that participate in these programs through Uyghur Academy, it allows for so much more consciousness of who they are. So like my personal experience is as a result of growing up in Texas, I didn't really have any Uyghur friends my own age, naturally. And so after coming to Turkey, which was the first time I even left the United States for that matter, I was able to meet other Uyghur youth who are so passionate. And as a result, we do so much activism together. We've traveled to Turkey together. I'm doing so many other projects. And I'm currently working on an Uyghur organization called Rawan Mentorship, where we, as Uyghur youth that attend schools like Cornell and Carnegie Mellon and MIT as well, we've kind of come together to mentor other Uyghur youth to be able to achieve academic and professional success while also embodying the Uyghur identity in their work. So for example, we allowed a student to be able to get an internship this past summer at the Library of Congress, where she wrote about her Uyghur identity. And that same student ended up getting an acceptance to Princeton just last week. So she'll be attending that university as well. And then, on top of that, we also work on allowing Uyghur high schoolers to get involved in tech. So Monlam AI is a lot of what they were inspired by, actually. So they created an optical character recognition software for analyzing the Uyghur script. And as a historian or aspiring historian, this is going to be so helpful for me in terms of analyzing Uyghur script as well. So a lot of even high schoolers as Uyghurs are developing this through this program and mentorship that we're doing. So a lot of this work would not have been possible without even being able to go to this and having this awareness of my people's history, my people's culture. The basis of why I study what I study is to pay homage to the Uyghurs who are detained, the Uyghurs who are in concentration camps, simply for studying and writing about things as simple as, or not even simple really, but something as vital to Uyghur identity, such as shrines or mosques, and all of which have been obviously demolished, but the scholars that studied them are now behind bars. And so it is for them that I do the work I do. And thank you so much.
Thank you, Hofstra.
Yeah.
Just with that, this is a program supported by USAID and USIP. We did that last year in Ankara and also this year in Istanbul. However, we don't know next year we're going to have fund to continue this program, so to your attention. And in terms of artificial intelligence, the current modern technology, we also, to your point earlier, we, Uyghur Academy, also initiated to collaborate with an AI company, basically. We started giving them digital books. We have thousands of Uyghur language textbooks, books basically in diaspora, many in Turkey. And however, this company was going to collaborate with us. They changed the leadership. Now they become quiet. Yeah. So we, again, need continued support. Thank you.
Thank you. First of all, to the next generation of great leaders who are going to carry not only your family's history, your nationality and cultural history, your language, the very essence of who you are, whether it be Uyghur, Mongolian, Tibetan, Taiwanese. Learning from each other, working and executing is a huge aspect of this. Also working to counter the false narrative that is being provided. And this is where I, Mr. Chairman, really look towards that of what we can do in the artificial intelligence space to be clear when a counter-narrative comes out from the CCP, to be able to confront it with fact, to be able to be timely about it, and to be able to provide air support back to those who are on the ground in and around China. I will end with this and just say there has to be an opportunity here to recognize that it is not China alone. It is who China is able to bully. And it's not just the existing generation, the next generation. It includes some of our tech companies who also need to be bold in this, to be able to stand up and not feel pressure from Beijing to not support the type of innovation, the success, the AI that has been able to provide truth in the face of overwhelming opposition. But just like Tank Man in Tiananmen 35 years ago, it takes each one of you to stand up to an overwhelming Chinese repression system to make sure that these individuals and your future voice continues to be heard. So I salute you on that. This commission continues to stand with you. Thank you very much for being here today.
Thank you.
I yield my time, Mr. Commissioner.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Nunn. Let me just thank you, Kosar Yassin. Thank you for your very fine intervention. Your comments are fantastic, off the cuff. If there's anything else any of you would like to add before we conclude, I just want to underscore that, the commission, and thankfully it's in a bipartisan, bicameral way, and with the executive branch, we really have to redouble our efforts. The Chinese people deserve better than the Chinese Communist Party. And, injustice need not be forever. And as you continue to speak out, as you do so eloquently for those who are at risk by chronicling the history and making sure it's accurate, you really do a huge service to humanity. And so thank you, because it's hard work. I'm sure it's very hard work, but you're up to it. And, I was thinking as Dr. Monlam was talking about, his 50,000 book collection, Thomas Jefferson was the beginning of our Library of Congress when he donated his books. Books are extremely important, accurate books in chronicling of history. So thank you so very, very much. But if there's anything else any of you would like to add before we conclude, thank you so much. The Commission's hearing is adjourned.